The strongest villain in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. This is arguably the most debated topic as all the antagonists have incredibly strong stands with ridiculous powers. One review with his Calamity that is able to literally attack you from everywhere at the same time, and Pucci being able to literally destroy the universe with his stand made in heaven. But who really is the strongest? In this video, I'm going to be showing you Araki's interpretation of who really is the strongest antagonist. There are a lot of ways to measure strength, so for the sake of the video, I'm going to be making two options. One, who's physically the strongest character, and two, whose character's got the strongest stand ability. Believe it or not, Dio is actually the character that fits both of these criterias. This is something that Araki has been hinting at for a while, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you just why. I made a similar video for the Joestars, which I highly recommend you watching. It will be in the description below. But without further ado, starting with Dio's ability and how it would match up against all the other villains. Dio's stand the world is a time-stopping ability that allows him to stop time for a duration of 9 seconds. During this time stop, everybody and everything is frozen in motion, allowing only Dio and his stand to move around. Jotaro could also move around in this time stop, but that's because his body has adapted to this higher level of time manipulation. The reason why I'm saying it's a higher level of time is because the time-stopping ability as a whole was stated by Araki to be the strongest ability in history. This implies that it's vastly stronger than any other time-related abilities, such as Diavolo's Time Erasure and Kira's Bites to Dust, which literally blows away the entire universe as stated. Bites to Dust is an ability that literally blows away time and sends him back, kind of like a respawn button that sends him to the last save point and destroys the universe by doing it. Dio can also move around in the time stop, which means he operates on a higher level of time, along with the fact that he would have a natural resistance to time erasure abilities from everybody in JoJo, such as Diavolo. Although he only has a 2-second resistance similar to Jotaro, it should give him enough time to just time stop and overpower whatever obstacle he has encountered. He would have a similar experience to Diavolo's time erasure as the Golden Experience Requiem did. The world would stop Diavolo and Kira in motion, rendering them completely useless along with the Golden Experience Requiem. Golden Experience Return to Zero ability is essentially a manipulation of causal changes. What GR does is reverting all actions back to its original state, which is the beginning, or zero, by dragging his opponents back to the original cause. To dumb it down, what Giorno does when he sees something he doesn't like is to spam Ctrl Z. The reason this wouldn't work on Dio's The World is because it stated that Time Stop is the strongest ability in history, which obviously takes part 5 into account. The World's time stopping ability puts the current state to 0, so you can't really revert 0 back to 0. The result of Time Stop and Time Erasure are essentially the same, as they both render the time and the speed formula null by either taking it out of the equation completely or simply temporarily pausing it. Since Jotaro and Dio has a temporal resistance to this, they are completely unaffected by it during their 2-second period. Along with the fact that Dio is definitely faster and stronger than Diavolo, so you should be able to cover that distance in 2 seconds or less, and take him out before his time is up. Or you could just spam his time stop and the time racing ability. Although it sounds ridiculous to say, according to Araki, this is an application that works, since Dio's ability is able to overpower it somehow. I'll go more into detail about strength and speed after this. Cars vs Dio is such a mismatch and unfair fight, as Dio is vastly stronger and faster, and can literally just stop time, rendering Cars completely useless, and throw him back up in space again. Or just pulling Naruto and spam time stop since he has literally no restriction or limit to it, and he was spamming it against Polnareff. For Pucci, Dio would simply just give him the same treatment Jotaro did, stop time, and just stop him in the motion, except in this situation, he isn't really worried about the people around him dying, because of his lack of compassion would just end Pucci right then and there. Not only was Jotaro nerfed, but Jotaro was also being held down emotionally by his crew and was under a mental burden because he needed to worry about their safety, which is something that Dio doesn't have to do at all. Jotaro also has a couple of seconds cooldown on his time stop, which is something that Dio simply does not have. This is shown in his fight against Polnareff, where he just spammed time stop and dragged his ass down the flight of stairs repeatedly. Dio's time stop is also 2 times longer than Jotaro, so even if time acceleration is activated, he should have more than enough time to literally walk over to Pucci and end him right away. Dio isn't easily killed either, so even if his body were to be separated from his head, he should be able to still use his stand, as the stand is a spiritual soul-like thing, and Dio is immortal. For Dio vs D4C is honestly just so bad. Yeah, it's an amazing defensive ability, but it only is when it's inside of the astral dimensional wall, or love train. D4C cannot really use any offensive abilities when he's inside of the dimensional wall, which means that he has to exit it to attack somebody like Dio, which is an obvious no-no. The second Funny Valentine tries to leave his dimensional wall, Dio will just stop time or just rip his arms off or just end him right away. This of course is if Dio doesn't just overpower the wall itself, as it hasn't really shown any resistance to a force that Dio can dish out with his punches. So it either ends with him leaving the dimensional gap or him destroying the gap itself. The Wonder of You versus Dio's The World. There has been a lot of misinterpretations for Wonder of You's ability and what Araki has said about him. People believe that Araki is saying that his ability is the strongest opponency and forgets to read the entire sentence before drawing conclusions. What Araki says is, the strongest and scariest opponent I could think of is an enemy that isn't understandable and is an enemy to all things equally. It's the strongest ability because nobody understands how it works, and it's not something that can be beaten in a conventional way, like kicking, punching, or even headbutting and on some caveman shit. Araki is obviously not saying that it could cause the most amount of damage, as what Wonder of You is able to dish out is kitchen knives and small pieces of a plane or a random cricket making you fall over, while characters like Killer Queen are able to literally blow up the entire universe, and Maiden Heaven is able to literally destroy it itself. If Wonder of You were to fight Dio, nothing in his arsenal would have worked, as Dio would have just time stopped and moved away from his attacks. So to conclude the abilities section, yes, time stop is the strongest thing. Not only has Araki said it a billion times, but it's heavily hinted in the show. Now that we're done with the ability section, how strong is Dio? Dio Brando is massively stronger than that of Tarkus, who can split a cliff casually with a swing. Dio, of course, being massively stronger than Jonathan is a given, as he frequently overpowers him throughout the fight, which massively upscales him with characters such as Cars. A lot of people use the food chain panel as a confirmation that Cars should logically be stronger than every other vampire, but they forget that it's just a reference to the hierarchy. While it shows the vampires are below the pillarments, this doesn't apply to all vampires. Just like in the real life food chain, where some animals considered lower, such as a mouse, can beat and eat scorpions easily. Dio is the mouse in this analogy. He is the exception among vampires, able to transcend the pillarments since he has demonstrated stronger feats. But this in itself is an association fallacy, as we cannot make the assertion that all vampires are equally as strong. We definitely know that Dio is both physically stronger than Cars and more durable, as nobody in part 2 is able to perform a feat on the level of Tarkus, which is weaker than Dio by at least 5 times. Considering that both Jonathan and William Zeppeli were getting bullied by both Dio and Tarkus, and they being stated to be exactly 5 times weaker than Dio combined. With the fact that Kars is constantly getting blown away by pistols and torn apart by them, and needed to use a makeshift flashbang to escape. When Kars achieves the ultimate life form, what it said is that he gets all the powers of every living form concurrently, which means he holds all the power of the living beings at the present. So he's definitely not stronger than Jotaro, since Jotaro wasn't born at the time, or Dio because he didn't have a stand or his body. Maybe except for head Dio, which is completely fine because he's been marinating in the ocean for over 100 years and was stated to lose all his power and barely survived because of the lack of energy left in Jonathan's dying body. With that being cleared up, besides having Hamon, which is stated 100 times stronger than Joseph's, Kars doesn't really have any other significant strength amps. We don't actually know how much stronger Kars got, aside from the fact that he's stronger than chimps, crickets, and baboons in the jungle. Since Hamon isn't really a linear strength amplifier, we can't definitely say he got 100 times stronger and faster. Otherwise, he would have just blown right through Joseph, which is something he would have realistically done anyways, as he's relative to Lisa, who's confirmed 3 times stronger than Joseph. So Dio's massively stronger than Kars and definitely faster, as he scales to characters such as Silver Chariot, who are able to cross between 300 to 4,000 times the speed of light, depending on the calc of course, while Kars is barely crossing light speed. For Kira, I've already covered the whole ability aspect of these characters. Dio will just stop time and bop him in the forehead before he's able to use his Bites to Dust. Jotaro is stated to be the strongest in part 4, and we know for a fact, based on canon knowledge, that Jotaro is at his peak in all aspects, both physically and in terms of abilities, when he's fighting Dio at the end of part 3. From this part 6 panel, Jotaro is massively stronger and faster than Kira, to the point where Kira thinks he's stopping or manipulating time because of how fast he's moving. He literally cannot react to him, and that's a Jotaro is almost passed out from all the damage he has taken from sheer heart attack. So if a almost 30-year-old Jotaro who hasn't fought in roughly 20 odd years is able to do this, then Dio should logically be able to destroy him. When it comes to Diavolo, it really isn't that complicated either, since in part 4, Diavolo was present for the statement of Jotaro being the strongest and fastest character, which would still put a weaker Jotaro above Diavolo. This of course circles back to Dio putting him above in every single aspect. Jotaro vs. Maiden Heaven wasn't a fair representation of how strong Jotaro really is, which led to a lot of misinterpretations of his strength. For instance, Jotaro hasn't been fighting for roughly 12 years and has been busy with work, which puts him in a completely different frame of mind. He's almost double his age in part 3 and he's taken massive breaks from fighting, which is something that is visually shown, as he has massive loss of muscle mass. In part 3, he was built like a Greek god, while in part 6, he looks like he's been starving himself. Due to the lack of reputation of fighting or sparring, it likely has reduced his speed and reflexes. It might just be the art style and why he looks visually smaller, but this is touched upon on the stand card where it explains that he was at his physical peak in part 3. So it's safe to say that Jotaro is far away from his prime years. But even this version of Jotaro is able to keep up with Pucci. Although he's being outsped, the difference isn't really that massive. Jotaro almost catches him with his barrages and he's able to put him in a time stop multiple times. If a slower Jotaro is able to do this, then a prime Jotaro, who has been fighting for every single day and practicing what arguably the Wikipedia stands Avdo, it would make sense for him to be able to beat Maiden Heaven easily. Since Dio's relative, if not equal to prime Jotaro, he should be able to beat him easily, under the first time stop as I mentioned earlier. Funny Valentine honestly is just too weak and slow. I really don't understand the hype. He gets bullied by bullets and loses a 5v1 against the dinosaur Dio. Diego, who barely dodges bullets, is able to do this, so imagine a Dio who's massively faster than light with a stand. I covered the ability aspect of Winner of View versus Dio, but what about strength? People think that Winner of View's ability is passive and therefore it's instantaneous, but passive doesn't necessarily mean instantaneous at all. The ability itself could be activated at all times, but that doesn't necessarily mean the effect responds instantaneously. This is evident in Jojo. We see both Yashu and the bowl hair kid are actively interacting with it and even attempting to pursue him, and only get dealt with by Calamity a couple of chapters later. The ability is able to encroach everybody equally by Araki's statement. What has been shown in the manga, then the amalgamation of attacks he has been displayed really wouldn't do jack to Dio. It would literally just repel off his body like Superman and bullets. I honestly don't believe that somebody with Dio's level of strength could be hurt by a knife or a piece of a plane. Tor doesn't have speed scaling as he gets bullied by a motorcycle stand that is arguably slightly faster than Josuke, who can barely outrun an overweight lady. So when the kitchen knife, rubble, or whatever insect is thrown towards Dio, he could just time stop and legit take a large step to the side and end Winner of View. So although Araki himself never uttered the words that Dio's stronger than everybody else, he did indirectly say it through the narrative, as I've shown you guys, which heavily supports this side. So to answer the question, yes, Dio is massively stronger than every other JoJo villain that would be able to beat them. I didn't go too in depth about the strength and speed scaling of JoJo's characters because I've covered that extensively in other videos, which you can see on the screen right now. I highly recommend watching them. Subscribe and like the video if you enjoyed it, and peace.